Welcome, everyone, for worship and this message. I am so glad to be able to share this first in our Advent worship series today, O Come, Emmanuel. Now, if you are a stickler for following the church calendar, and who out there is not a stickler for following the church calendar? And somebody's thinking right now, church calendar, I can't even keep what day it is straight on the regular calendar. We had July in November this week, and here it is, a Wednesday, and I'm recording a worship sermon for Sunday. I don't know, it's confusing, isn't it? But if you are a stickler for the church calendar, you know that we are jumping the gun. We are moving ahead and starting Advent 2 weeks early. When Pastor Kevin thought of this idea a few months ago, it was making so much sense. He said, in this strange year, the words of an ancient hymn, the Advent hymn, O Come, Emmanuel, resonate so strongly. Let's take extra time this year in the middle of a holiday season that's going to be strange, in the middle of a holiday season that sometimes overwhelms Advent, and ask God to make room in our lives for the coming of Jesus. And so we're excited to do that. As we looked at the hymn verses of that ancient hymn, they just suggested we could build wonderful messages. And so we're going to intersect that old hymn and its verses with the Bible and share with you in this series. So let's get started today with verse 1. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appears. Picture the people of God, ancient Israel, as described in this hymn verse. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. The people of God, we know in the Bible story, were chosen. They were the promised people of Abraham. Their numbers were like the stars in heaven. They were delivered out of slavery in Egypt and led to the promised land. The 12 tribes of Jacob that had grown separate from one another were united under King David and the glory of King Solomon, his son. And they could not have imagined what then took place. A great threat arose against the kingdom of Israel, first the Assyrians and then the Babylonians, and the kingdom of Israel was surrounded at the borders. The people of God thought, surely we are the chosen ones. God will prevent any threat from coming our way. But the enemy crossed the borders and surrounded the holy city of Jerusalem. They thought, surely God will defend the holy city. But they breached the walls and threatened the holy temple itself, and the people of God thought, surely God will protect the Ark of the Covenant that is the resting place for the commandments, our way of life in God. But not a stone remained unturned in that siege of the temple, and the people of God were scattered, and so many lost their lives, and those that remained, the remnant, was carried off into slavery, into Babylon, over a century of exile. That mourns in lonely exile here. Think of that verse. How many generations in the history of time, how often in our own experience have we awakened one day and asked, how did this happen? How did we get here? Where is God? Think back just a year ago, November of 2019, we looked ahead and we thought to ourselves, we'll plan next year with 2020 vision. And what did we envision for this year? And then 2020 happened. When our world, when our expectations are rocked, what of our faith? Israel really did believe that they were chosen of God and that God especially loved them. And it was painful for them to discover and find out that that wasn't true, at least in the manner that they expected. They did not have the protection that they expected from God. Where is God now? They ask. What about our faith in the midst of tumult, when we wake up and everything has changed? To the people of God in exile, a message came from the prophet Jeremiah, but it wasn't the message that they might have expected. It wasn't simply a message of, hold on, everything's going to be okay. It wasn't a message that, don't worry, God's going to make you great again, like you were in the times that you remember. It was a message that they couldn't have expected. You can read it yourself in the 29th chapter of Jeremiah. I encourage you to open your Bibles to the 4th through the 7th verse of Jeremiah 29. You can pause this message if you'd like to join me. Open up your Bibles and your phones. Jeremiah 29. These are the words of the prophet to the exiles and all the people taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons. Give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. Do not decrease. Plant where you live. Make homes among your enemies. Bless those who threaten and harm you. What is God saying? What could God possibly mean? Seek the welfare of the place where you are challenged to live right now. God is defining the biblical message that is amplified in the life of Jesus Christ, who taught us, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. God turns our orientation to life upside down. We think God is destroyed in the things that are happening around us, but God is active now, and God is calling us to get involved in God's activity. Consider the second verse of our ancient Advent hymn. O come, O wisdom from on high, embracing all things far and nigh. In strength and beauty come and stay. Teach us your will and guide our way. What is this wisdom from on high? What might we recognize as God's wisdom right here, right now? If, with God's wisdom, we can realize that the mess that we're in, this COVID mess, this political mess, the individual personal messes that occupy our attention, are opportunities to dwell in the presence of God, to love ourselves and to love others, our faith flourishes, and we discover exactly what it means to rejoice, rejoice because God is with us. Think of it. In this time, God is giving us ample opportunity to seek the welfare of this world, to seek the welfare of our neighbors. These challenging times and places where we live, God is giving us ample opportunity right now to discover His presence in our care for one another, and we dare not miss this opportunity. O wisdom of God, teach us your will and guide our way, the hymn says. And what is God's will and God's way? It is the way of healing and love. God's healing and God's love is the way to face our problems. There is no way out of exile without surrendering ourselves to God. Have you surrendered yourself to God lately? And what would it look like if we do that? It would look like Advent. It would look like waiting in quiet and prayer. It looks like laying before God all that we are going through and offering to God our anger, our bitterness, our cynicism, our desire for revenge, our despair, our moments where life is crushing. We lay it before God and we receive His love, and God softens our hardened hearts and guides our way. Look back at the opening words of our hymn verse today. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. Isn't it true we can be held captive imagining that God is not present? Now we can be imprisoned in our own sorrowness. But God calls us today, and we can realize that God is being revealed in this present circumstance. God has ransomed Himself. God has offered Himself in death and resurrection to create new life in and through us. Surrender to God's creative power. Rejoice, rejoice as you pray. O come, Emmanuel.